Hi, I'm Walt Wheeler, Executive Director of the Michigan Masonic Charitable Foundation, and we're here today doing another segment in the Legacy Series, interviewing past Grand Masters of the Grand Lodge of Michigan. Today we're interviewing past Grand Master Robert W. Stevens, who served 1997 and 1998. Bob, welcome.
Thank you.
Let's start at the beginning and tell us where you were born.
I was born in Saginaw in March of 1943.
Saginaw, Michigan. Did you grow up there?
I did. In fact, I spent the first 65 years of my life in Saginaw.
So you must have liked it there.
I did, yes.
Tell me a little bit about your parents.
My dad was employed by General Motors and worked there for some 32 years. Mom primarily was a stay-at-home mom. When my brothers and sisters got a little bit older, she ended up working for Woolworth Company in downtown Saginaw. But for the most of her life bringing up the kids, she was a stay-at-home mom.
Well, you mentioned siblings. Tell me about your siblings.
I have 3 brothers and 3 sisters. The youngest of the brothers was killed suddenly in an automobile accident back in the late 1980s out in California. All of the rest of my sisters and brothers are still alive. I have 3 sisters and 2 brothers.
And what do they do?
My brother lives up in Traverse City, retired from the cable company. My sister lives in St. Charles. She's the oldest one. I'm the second oldest. My sister that lives in St. Charles, who's a year older than I am, her husband and I actually graduated from high school together and worked at General Motors together. And they're both retired now. I have a sister that lives in Virginia, another brother that lives in Bridgeport, and another sister that lives she still lives in Saginaw.
So most of them stayed here in Michigan.
Yes.
Tell us about some childhood memories. What are some of the most vivid recollections?
You know, I can remember the first house that we lived in Saginaw, and I lived there until I was 4 years old. It was a house over on Kendrick Street, and I guess I don't know why I remember that, but I do, as a young child, remember living in that house on Kendrick Street. And then we moved to a house on Coolidge, and that's the house that I lived in up until the time I graduated from high school. And I can remember some of the memories of living there in the house on Coolidge Street in Saginaw. Just down the block, one of the neighbors in the wintertime would flood his extra lot next to his house and had lights put up there, and we used to go out there and ice skate during the wintertime. During the summertime, down the other end of the block, there was a guy that put a little small baseball diamond in and a backstop. And we used to go down there in the summertime and play ball as kids. So those are some of probably the most vivid recollections that I have, you know, as memories of growing up.
No memories of getting in trouble with your brothers or your sisters?
No, not really. Actually, we actually got along pretty well together, and I don't recall any situations where we got in trouble with one another.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
You talked a little about growing up in Saginaw. Where did you go to school?
We lived out in the township in Saginaw and went to an elementary school. It was called Hemmeter School. And that school was from kindergarten all the way up through 6th grade. And then when I was old enough to go to junior high school, there were no schools in the township out there past elementary, so I had to go into the city. And I went to North Junior High School, which is 6th through the 9th grade. And then when I graduated from there, I went on to high school at Arthur Hill and graduated in 1961.
Did you participate in any school activities, sports, band?
You know, I really didn't because of all the activities that we had going on in the neighborhood and so forth. I never really got involved playing in any sports or activities at the school.
I know that you were a member of the Order of D.M.A. Tell me a little bit about your D.M.A. experience.
I was. I remembered that I joined D.M.A. in 1958. There were a couple of the guys that I went to school with that belonged to D.M.A., and I started asking them questions about what's this organization all about, and they said, well, it's an organization for young men, and you might really be interested in joining it. So I did. And I can recall that it was the D.M.A. chapter met at that time in downtown Saginaw, where the one lodge building was located in downtown Saginaw. And I don't remember how many active members of that chapter there were, but there were a lot. As a result of that, I never ever actually had an opportunity to serve as an officer in the chapter. I served as a preceptor, but never had the opportunity to serve as an officer because there were a whole lot more boys than there were chairs available. So that's one of the things that I'll always remember, you know, about DeMolay, and comparing what DeMolay is like today, you know, compared to what it was like back when I first joined it. So it was a very active and thriving DeMolay chapter.
What was your chapter name?
George Washington chapter in Saginaw. Mm-hmm.
So you didn't participate as an officer,
Right.
but were you involved in DeMolay activities?
Oh, certainly. Yes, sure was. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Well, after you graduated from high school, I know that you met a lovely lady named Trudy. Why don't you tell us how you met her and what that led to?
There was a little hiccup there in between the time that before I met Trudy and after I graduated from high school. I had intended on joining the Navy. And there were two other guys that I went to high school with that all three of us were going to go in and join the Navy and go in together. And so it was during our senior year in high school, we all went down and took the written exams and then had to go down to Fort Wayne down near Detroit to do the physical test and physical portion of getting enlisted into the Navy. The two other guys that I was going to go in with had already kind of gotten through it, and I guess I don't remember why I was later than they were as far as doing that, but I got the written exam done and taken care of in Saginaw, and then they shipped me down to Fort Wayne for the physical part of it, and lo and behold, I didn't pass the physical part of being able to join because I was underweight for my age. I weighed 118 pounds when I was a senior in high school. And this was just prior to the breakout of the Vietnam War. So they weren't necessarily, you know, looking and trying to get individuals into the military like they had, you know, like they would have been if the war had already broken out. So as a result of the fact that I didn't get into the Navy because I didn't weigh enough, I went back to Saginaw, and that's when I met Trudy. She was a senior in high school at that time, and she went to Saginaw High. And back in those days, the big thing for high school kids to do or young kids to do was there were drive-in theaters in different parts of Saginaw, and we just kind of hop from one drive-in theater to a drive-in restaurant, and just, you know, hop around to the different restaurants and the different drive-ins, and that's where I met Trudy, was at a drive-in restaurant over in the east side of Saginaw, and lo and behold, couple years later, we ended up getting married.
So you must have been pretty brave to go talk to her. Did she come up to you?
You know, actually, the very first time we met, it was she and her sister were in a car right next to where we were parked. And I actually ended up starting to talk with her sister before that I ended up starting to talk with her. So it was kind of just unusual the way that thing worked out.
So how long were you guys married?
We were married for just over 40 years.
40 years. That's wonderful. I know that you tragically lost Trudy to brain cancer.
I did.
But then a few years after that, you met another wonderful lady, Pam. Why don't you tell us how you and Pam met?
I did. Trudy passed away in October of 2004. And for the next 3-4 years, I just wasn't really enthusiastic or excited about, you know, trying to go out and find somebody else. And I was just kind of doing my own thing. And then I decided one day, you know, I've heard of this eHarmony on the internet, and I wonder if, you know, what that's all about. So lo and behold, I ended up signing up on eHarmony, and lo and behold, Pam also was on eHarmony, and that's how we met, and that was in 2008. And the very first place that we got together was out at Chicago O.E.S Pizza at the Birch Run Outlet Mall. And we met there for dinner and probably spent 2 or 3 hours that night just talking with one another and getting to know one another a little bit. And ultimately, that was in 2008. And then in November of 2010, we ended up getting married.
Oh, that's wonderful. I know you have two children.
I do.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about your children?
I have my oldest is a son. It's Robert Jr. He lives up in Bay City. After graduating from high school, he was working for a security company, ADT security company, and he ended up starting to go to school on a part-time basis. And then there was the security company that he worked for they sent him up to Tawas. There was a supermarket up there that was having some labor issues, and so they ended up needing some security people to go up there. So he went up to work at that supermarket in Tawas, and he met Debbie, whom he ended up getting married to. And so it was always my theory and philosophy that Bob did things kind of backwards. He ended up meeting Debbie, and a couple of years after they got married, they had a daughter. And he quit school because of all of, marrying and having the little one. But then he ultimately decided, in order to make something out of myself and to further myself in life, I really need to get a college education. So he did go back to school, and he ended up getting his nursing degree and worked as an R.A.M, both in hospitals up in Saginaw and the Bay City area.
Very good.
And my daughter Patty worked for Dow Chemical Company. She actually started working there as a co-op student in her senior year in high school. And she's still employed by Dow Chemical today. So it's been some 25, 26 years now that she's been employed by Dow Chemical.
I know you have some grandchildren.
I do.
That are the joy of your life. Why don't you tell us about that?
I do. My son Bob has three. The oldest one is Sarah Beth. She's going to be turning 23 in August. Allison is 18 years old, and then they have a son, Danny, who is going to he will be turning 8 years old in July. My daughter Patty has two girls. The oldest is Paige, and she just got her driver's license. She just turned 16. She just got her driver's license. And the youngest one, her name is Paris, and she's old. So we just, because of the fact that I live in Fenton now, not in Saginaw, I don't get to see them quite as often as what I used to, but we try to get together with them just as often as we can.
That's wonderful. I know grandchildren are a great blessing.
They certainly are.
Tell me a little bit about your working life. Let's start with, what was your first job?
Very first job I ever had, I don't exactly remember what grade I was in high school. I was just maybe 14 or 15 years old, but the very first job that I got in high school, or in grade school, during the summer, I ended up getting a job pushing an ice cream cart. The one that, I don't know how many people might remember these. You used to push around and had the bells on the handlebars and so forth, and I don't remember exactly how much it was that I earned that summer, but I made something like 2 cents, maybe 3 cents every bar of ice cream that I would sell. So that was the first job that I had. Later on, when I got into high school, I ended up working I worked at the Kroger store, working as a bag boy at the Kroger store, and then the last job that I had before I graduated from high school was working for Sears and Roebuck, and there was a farm store in Saginaw, where they did, sold a lot of farm equipment and did a lot of, that's where their maintenance and repair shop was located. And probably the biggest thing that I did there, we're working at that store, was steam cleaning lawnmowers, getting them ready to be worked on and getting them ready to be repaired. That was the last job that I had before I graduated from high school.
So after graduation?
After graduation and after my stint of not being able to get into the military, due to the fact that Dad worked at General Motors, Dad told me that there were some openings over there in the skilled trades area, and they were looking for pattern making apprentices. So I applied for that job, and I was 19 years old, and I got hired as an apprentice over there at the GM plant in Saginaw, and spent the next 33 years working for General Motors. And part of that apprenticeship program included not only on-the-job training, but it also included a vocational part or an educational part. So I went to school for 4 years as part of that training to complete the apprenticeship program. And we switched working shifts every 3 months, going between days and nights and working a third shift. And when we worked during the day, we went to school at night, and then when we worked night shift hours, we went to school during the days. That was a 4-year period of time, and it was a real experience and something I'll just never ever regret being able to do. And I was just a happy employee for General Motors for 33 years.
So tell us, what does a pattern maker do for those that are not in the automobile industry?
Actually, we actually built the patterns that the molds are used to make various engine parts. And probably the largest number of parts that we made at that plant where I worked, we made engine blocks, we made crankshafts, we've made differential carriers, we made the caliper housings that are utilized to hold on to the disc brakes for the cars. So we made and maintained all of the patterns that we utilized in pouring the castings that were used to make all of these various engine parts.
What plant did you work at?
I worked at I started out at the gray iron plant, and after I completed my apprenticeship, they built a brand new plant in Saginaw. It was called the nodular iron plant, and that's where a lot of the safety parts were built, the disc calipers and the steering knuckle arms for the front end of the car. That's where those parts were made, and so I worked at that particular location for 21 years. And after 21 years, they decided to close that plant down, and so I went back to the gray iron plant where I originally started out. So the biggest share of my employment there, the 21 out of the 33 years, was spent at the nodular plant.
So after you retired from General Motors, you took on another career with the Scottish Rite Valley of Bay City. Tell us how that came about.
I sure did, because I was a member of the Board of Trustees up in the Valley of Bay City, and there was a guy named Fred Arneson who had been the executive secretary up there and had been the executive secretary for 30 years. And at board meetings, it was becoming very obvious and apparent to me that Fred was getting burned out, and it was just, he was getting to the point where he wanted to get out and he wanted to retire. And I got thinking to myself, that might be something that I might be interested in. So lo and behold, in December of 1994, I retired from General Motors, and then right on January the 2nd, I went to work as the assistant to the executive secretary up in the Valley of Bay City. And so that's how my career up there as an executive secretary in Bay City started out, and worked in that position for 8 years.
So tell us, what does an executive secretary for a Scottish Rite Valley do?
Actually, you run the entire business of the Valley on a day-to-day basis. We only had one other full-time gal that worked in the office, and then we had a part-time gal that worked in the office. And because of the fact that we actually owned the building that we met in, we had 2 maintenance guys that took care of and maintained the building. And so I managed the business of that office, and in addition to that, we did a lot of rentals, and so I was in charge of making certain that whatever rentals that we acquired, making certain that things were set up for them, and that went well. Was in charge of setting up the budget and to get the Board of Trustees to approve the budget on an annual basis. So it was running the business on a day-to-day basis of the Valley.
While you were at the Valley of Bay City, I know that you had an offer for a different position.
I did. As the individual who approached me, his famous saying, I was just minding my own darn business. Well, I was minding my own darn business up there in the Valley of Bay City as the executive secretary, and we ended up traveling up. This was the summer of 2002. We went up to Traverse City. Past Grand Master Don Hemming passed away. And so we went up to Don Hemming's memorial service, and while I was up at that memorial service, David Bedwell, who was Grand Master at that time, took me aside after the memorial service was over and said that he wanted to talk with me about a job with the Grand Lodge. And he said that Don Boyer, who at that time was the Grand Secretary of the Grand Lodge, was also the president of the National Masonic Foundation for Children, or the executive director for the National Masonic Foundation for Children. And because of that position, it was going to make it more complicated, more difficult for him to continue on as the Grand Secretary for the Grand Lodge, so he asked me if there was any possibility that I might be interested in maybe taking over that position. And so Trudy and I spent a long time thinking that thing over and contemplating whether I ought to, would take on that position, because what that also involved was, because of the fact I lived in Saginaw, the office for the Grand Lodge at that time was located in Grand Rapids. And that's obviously, it was going to be too much of a trek to try to commute on a day-to-day basis going back and forth. So if I were to take on the job, why, it was going to cause me to probably take out an apartment in Grand Rapids so that I wouldn't have to have that long daily commute. So after giving it some long, serious, hard consideration, I decided that might be something that I was interested in, so I accepted the offer. And so in January of 2003, I went to Grand Rapids, and what I did was there on a part-time basis from January until April the 1st. I was working 3 days a week at the Grand Lodge office and still working 2 days a week at the secretary's job in Bay City, helping break in my replacement as the executive secretary in Bay City. So that was kind of a tumultuous time period. And like I said, I worked 3 days a week in Grand Rapids and 2 days a week in Bay City. So that was from January until April, and then on April the 1st of 2003 is when I took over full-time as the Grand Secretary for the Grand Lodge.
A position which you still hold.
And it's a position that I still hold.
So be honest with us. Of all those jobs, which one's been your favorite?
Actually, the Grand Secretary of the Grand Lodge. It's given me an opportunity to meet a large number of people whom I've made friends with, and it's not only just throughout the state of Michigan, but it's across the entire country. And I've met individuals who I've become friends with, and we still communicate with a lot of those guys that I still communicate with on a fairly regular basis, and it's been a real learning and growing experience, and it's taught me a whole lot more about the Masonic fraternity than I ever knew. And so that's, of all the jobs, that's been probably the most favorite that I've ever had.
Other than Masonic, have you been a member or involved in any other community organizations or clubs?
I really haven't, because of my sincere involvement with the Masonic fraternity. That's really, taken up the biggest share of my time, both my free time and my working life. So
let's move on to the Masonic fraternity then. How did you first learn about Freemasonry?
Well, because of the fact that I joined DMLA in 1958, at that time Dad had also joined one of the lodges in Saginaw. In fact, he served as master of Solar Lodge, which no longer exists now. That lodge ended up consolidating with another lodge, but Dad served as master of that lodge in 1961. And so Dad was always, talking to me about Masonry and the lodge and all of that, and thought that that's something that I would certainly enjoy. So as soon as I turned 21, I joined the lodge. A member of Salina Lodge, number 155 in Saginaw.
So how did, going back to that, then, did your DMLA experience introduce your dad to Freemasonry, or was he already a member?
No, he was already a member, and once he became a member, he also then became familiar with DMLA, and he hadn't known what DMLA was all about too until the time he joined the lodge. So that's how it kind of came together.
Okay, very good. You said you joined Salina Lodge. What year was that?
1964 is when I joined Salina Lodge.
And I know you went through the officer line.
I did. I ended up serving as worshipful master in 1971. Okay. And then after becoming master of the lodge, I spent several years working, doing the position of, I was the treasurer of the lodge for a good number of years after I served as master.
Thinking back to your year as master, what are some of your most vivid memories there? Or your fondest memories?
I guess the lodge also, similar to DMLA, we had a very active and thriving lodge, and we always had a good number of members coming out to the various meetings and so forth, and we were doing degree work on a monthly basis. And probably one of the most vivid recollections that I have as my year as master, we did an entered apprentice degree one time, and we had a guy by the name of George Miller, who was 100 years old. And we had an enter-apprentice degree that night, and George came and did the apron presentation on our new entered apprentice. And that was an experience that just brought chills up and down your back, and made the hairs stand up on the back of your neck. And if that didn't have a real meaning to you, I guess somebody really probably didn't have too much of a heart. But he just what a fantastic job, and brought a tear to every man's eye that was there that night. So that was probably my most vivid recollection while I served as master.
I know that you belong to several appendant and affiliated Masonic organizations. Which ones do you belong to?
I belong to all of the York Rite Bodies. I belong to the Commandery. I belong to the Scottish Rite. I don't any longer, but I did at one time. I belonged to the Order of the Eastern Stars. But because of my involvement with the lodge and so forth, and never being able to attend, I ultimately just dropped my membership in the Eastern Stars.
I know you're a Shriner and
Yes.
a Jester.
Right.
Any other affiliated organizations?
Allied Masonic degrees.
Red Cross?
I do belong to the Red Cross, yes.
Okay, so most of them.
There are not too awful many that you don't hold a dues card to, correct. Yes.
Have you held leadership positions in any of those bodies?
I have the only one that I've held a leadership position in would have been the Scottish Rite. And I'm a past sovereign prince of the Council of Princes of Jerusalem up in the Valley of Bay City. That's the only other appendant body that I've served in a leadership position to.
And I know that you were very active in the degree work in the Scottish Rite in the Valley of Bay
I was.
City. Why don't you tell us about some of your bigger parts there?
Did a lot of parts up in the Valley of Bay City, primarily the Saginaw Scottish Rite Club did 2 big degrees every year up there. One of them was the 21st degree. I played the role of Prince Commander. I played the role of Reinfrid, who was another major place or a role in that particular degree. And then I also, the other degree that the Saginaw Scottish Rite Club was the 20th degree, the George Washington degree. And for many, many years, I played the part of Lafayette in the 20th degree. And in addition to the degree work up there in the Valley of Bay City, for many, many, many years, the Valley of Bay City at Easter time always did an Easter pageant. And that consisted of 150 members of the Scottish Rite, their families, the kids, the women, all took part in that particular Easter pageant. And we did 2 shows. One was on Good Friday in the evening, and we did one in the afternoon on Palm Sunday. And for 25 years, I had the opportunity of playing the role of Christ in the Easter pageant. So that's another vivid and happy memory that I've got of my involvement with the Scottish Rite.
I actually recall our first meeting, and I don't know if you Scottish Rite function in Grand Rapids. And we were in the hospitality room, and we ended up talking together, and we found out that we were both past sovereign princes, and both had done Constance,
Right.
and
Yes.
had a few other things
Yep.
in common as well.
Right. Yep, I do. I certainly do remember that.
Of all the organizations, and I think I probably know, of the appendant bodies, which one's your favorite?
The Scottish Rite. That was, like I say, I've been more involved with the Scottish Rite than I have any of the others, other than Blue Lodge.
I know that you've received many honors from several different organizations. Which one or two stand out the most or have the most meaning to you?
The one that I did receive was the active DeMolay Legion of Honor. I did receive that in 1996, I believe that it was. And then the other one that I'm most proud of was in 1991. I was coroneted a 33rd degree honorary member of the Supreme Council of Scottish Rite. So that's another one that I'm very, very happy and very proud of.
Tell us about some of the past Grand Masters that you've known personally, especially some of those from a little bit further back.
Although I never really had the opportunity to meet him, but one of the names of past Grand Masters that always was one that I'll always remember, and I remember I think I was junior warden of my lodge at that time, going to the annual communication session at the Detroit Masonic Temple in downtown Detroit, and it was W. Wallace Kent, and Wallace was a federal judge, and Wallace was one that Wally was one that was always just everybody seemed to like Wally, and was probably one of the more famous known names. And so that's one of them, but the one that I guess that I can remember of the furthest one back. Although, like I said, I never really had an opportunity to personally meet him. I do remember going to Grand Lodge session and at least, having the opportunity to observe him during the annual communication.
Legend in the history of the Grand Lodge. Who were some of your Masonic mentors?
Actually, the first Masonic mentor that I had, and he was the guy that actually appointed me to the position of Grand Marshal, was Bill Skrepnik. Bill and I did many parts and roles that we played together in the Scottish Rite degrees, and got to know Bill, and we've got to be a very good friend of Bill's. And so Bill was probably the biggest mentor that I ever had, or that I had all of my years coming through my history of the Masonic career anyway.
Appointed Grand Marshal, tell us about how that came about.
Well, I'll never forget, I was sitting and watching the Rose Bowl game, and it happened to be January of 1992, and at halftime the telephone rang. And it was Bill Skrepnik on the telephone. Bill was Grand Master at that time. And Bill informed me that the individual that had been elected Junior Grand Deacon at Grand Lodge the previous year had turned in his resignation and decided that he was going to resign. So Bill was looking for someone that would be interested in not only accepting the appointment as Grand Marshal, but who would have intentions on following through and going through the rest of the line of Grand Lodge, and ultimately being able to serve as Grand Master. So Bill just called me that day and asked me if he had a very important question he wanted to ask me, and wanted to know if I could meet him a couple of days later for coffee. And so I did. And it was over coffee when Bill shared with me what it was that he wanted to ask me, and that was another one of those situations that Trudy and I spent a good, long, hard time thinking about and talking over about whether or not, I would be willing to accept the position. I had ambitions and desires of someday, running for Grand Lodge, but I just didn't at that time have any, immediate intentions of doing so. But then after my conversation with Bill and talking it over with Trudy, we decided that, maybe now is the time, and maybe that's something I would be interested in. So I accepted that appointment, and the following weekend, the Grand Lodge officers were having a retreat in Dearborn, and it was at the Best Western in Dearborn, another place that was also known as the Pink Palace. So Bill asked if I would come down there at the end of their retreat. And so after the retreat was over, Bill brought me into the room and introduced me to the rest of the Grand Lodge officers, and informed them at that time that he had appointed me to the position of Grand Marshal, and so that's when I was installed as Grand Marshal.
Going into Grand Lodge is a huge commitment, and something that most guys have some time to think about and decide to run and hopefully get elected. Since this was kind of put on you a little bit suddenly, you remember what your initial reaction was, or your initial thought when he said, would you consider this position?
At that time, as I stated earlier, Trudy and I spent a long time talking about that, but I didn't really know and was really able to comprehend the level of commitment that was being made at that time. And I think most guys that come into Grand Lodge don't necessarily realize the amount of time commitment that you're willing to make, and the sacrifice of ending up being away from your family and a lot of your family occasions and so forth. So no, I really didn't at that time realize what the level of commitment was. And looking back at it, I certainly don't have any regrets, and if I had it to do all over again, I certainly would.
Progressed through the Grand Lodge line. What were some of your biggest surprises? I know we've all had situations as we go through the line that it's like, wow, I didn't expect that, or I didn't know that.
I would say, Walt, that probably my biggest surprises didn't really come about until actually I became Grand Master. And then all of a sudden you start getting some of these telephone calls that perhaps some of which you had maybe end up looking back at it, wished that you had never gotten, letters that you receive, and some of the other things that go on in the organization that you don't really know about and you're not really aware of until you actually end up with all of that authority and responsibility as Grand Master, and some of these end up getting dumped in your lap. So those are probably some of the biggest surprises that I had. And although kind of going through the line, you would have some of the officers that were ahead of you kind of forewarn you and let you know that, some of this stuff is going to be coming your way, but, you really can't really see it and comprehend it until it's actually there and you end up getting faced with some of these situations.
So you became Grand Master in 1997.
That's right.
What were some of the highlights of your year as Grand Master?
Probably the first one occurred because I was installed in May, and in July I was invited to attend the Imperial Shrine Session, which was held in St. Louis. And so I went to that shrine, I went to the Imperial Shrine Session, and that was an opportunity for me to gain a whole new perspective and a whole new appreciation for what the shrine does. And I was treated royally going to that Imperial session, and it really opened my eyes up more to the philanthropy and the good that the shrine does with their burn centers and their children's hospital across the country. So that's probably one of the first and one of the first real eye-opening experiences that I had. And another one was going to Supreme Council as Grand Master. It just so happened that the annual communication for the Supreme Council was held in Michigan the year that I was Grand Master, and the host Grand Master has the opportunity to sit up in the East with a Sovereign Grand Commander. And so I had that opportunity to sit up there next to the Commander for the annual communication of the Scottish Rite. So that was another one.
And to bring remarks in front of 3,000
And I had that
people.
opportunity to bring remarks in front of thousands of people at that session. So that's another vivid memory that I have. And in January, when I was Grand Master, that was the very first time that the Grand Lodge of Michigan decided that we were going to experiment and at least try out all degree days. So we did 3 of those all degree days during my term as Grand Master, the first of which was held in Grand Rapids. There was another one held down in Detroit, and then there was another one held in my hometown of Saginaw. So, and we met with what I considered to be at that time some real success with the all degree days. We didn't really know, how they were going to turn out and how much success we were going to gain from them. We didn't seem to get the numbers of candidates participate in the all degree days that some of the other jurisdictions around the country had done in the past, but I was very satisfied and very happy with what we did with the all degree days. So those are some of the very vivid recollections that I have as Grand Master.
I remember attending the one in Grand Rapids. So after you went out as Grand Master, you were working for the Valley. You got the call and asked you to become the Grand Secretary, right, and you took over that position in 2003. Tell us a little bit about the Grand Secretary's job. I think a lot of members of the fraternity don't really understand everything the Grand Secretary is responsible for.
Well, there's actually two different sides or two different facets to serving in a position of Grand Secretary. You have the fraternal side where you do a lot of your, going out and doing the activities with the lodges and getting involved with dedications and rededication ceremonies and attending the annual communication and being responsible for the minutes. As a member, as the Grand Secretary, you are also a member of the Board of Directors of the Grand Lodge. And as Grand Secretary, you take on the responsibility of keeping the minutes of all of of the Board of Directors meetings and making certain that those minutes are taken and getting distributed. And then you have the business side of the Grand Lodge, and that is running the business operation of the Grand Lodge office and supervising all of the employees in the Grand Lodge office. So, and that's a monumental task, and it's more than a 9-to-5 job, 5 days a week. You know, you just never know when, you know, something else is going to come up, and you might end up having to spend some extra time there. The fact that the Grand Lodge office was located in Grand Rapids, I spent the weekdays in Grand Rapids, and then on Friday after the office closed, I would get in my car and drive back to Saginaw and spend the weekend back in Saginaw, and then on Sunday night head back to Grand Rapids. So there's a whole lot involved, and I guess it's pretty difficult for me, you know, just sitting here to say, well, you have this responsibility and this responsibility and this responsibility. There is a tremendous amount of responsibility that's associated with the office as being Grand Secretary, and also that's includes, you know, communicating with the other jurisdictions around the country, and in a lot of cases around the world. So there's a lot involved and a lot of responsibility included and involved with the role of being Grand Secretary.
In your years as Grand Secretary, the Grand Secretary I know gets a lot of calls, and the Grand Secretary's office does. Mm-hmm. I know that you've had some calls that were humorous, to say the least. Can you think of some calls that you've gotten in the office, without mentioning any names or anything, that just totally amused you, where you just hung up the phone and just started laughing?
Well, there was one, and, you know, ironically, this didn't have anything to do with somebody from a lodge calling or something like that, or any kind of an issue or problem that one of the lodges was having, but it was my first year as Grand Secretary, and it just so happened that it was April the 1st, and April the 1st is also better known as April Fool's Day. Well, the gals in the office, you know, it's a serious business, and, you know, it's a lot of responsibility making certain that everything is getting done the way it's supposed to be getting done and when it's supposed to be getting done. But at the same time, you know, you have to have a little bit of fun too. And sometimes the gals in the office would do some things that would surprise me, and you just never know what's going to happen. Well, I did receive a telephone call on April the 1st, and it didn't even really occur to me that it was April the 1st, and I got a telephone call, and the gal identified herself as being associated with the Grand Traverse Resort. And this was where we were going to be holding Grand Lodge this year, was up at the resort. And so she wanted to call to inform me they had a real big problem, in that they had booked another big conference that was going to be in that hotel at the same time that we were going to be. And unfortunately, they were not going to be able to provide us with the number of rooms that we thought we were going to be able to have, sleeping rooms and so forth. But she said not to worry, that they were going to be able to take care of it, and they were going to book all of the overflow into the Motel 6 just down the road. And it just really caught me by surprise. And I said, well, you know, we actually have a contract. We've got a written contract about what we were going to be, some of the rooms that were promised to us, and everything was going to be occurring. And lo and behold, after I told her that, she started to kind of chuckle a little bit, and I found out that this happened to be the sister of my office manager. So it was an April Fool's joke that they were calling and pulling on me. And I'm going to tell you what, they had me. They had me hook, line, and sinker on that one. So that was probably one of the more funny things that occurred, and one of the more funny phone calls that I got when I was in the office.
Going back to a little more serious thing, I know that you've been intimately involved with the Grand Lodge now for 20 years. Mm-hmm. What do you think that we need to do as a fraternity to start growing again?
Actually, I think we are beginning to reap the benefits of the money that we have invested both on a PR standpoint of a lot of our radio advertisements, our billboard advertisements, and the tremendous amount of work that past Grand Master Conley has put into the Masonic Renewal Program. And so I'm sincerely of the belief that we have actually started to turn the corner, although we're still not necessarily showing a gain in membership. The losses are decreasing more and more every year, and I really believe that we've turned the corner and that it's not going to be too far down the road when we're actually going to be able to show an actual gain in membership from one year to the next.
Thinking about becoming a Mason, what would you tell them?
I would tell them that if you're looking for an organization that gives you the opportunity to become involved with and associated with men of good character and of good caliber, and an organization that's going to certainly help you become a better man, a better citizen, a better father, a better husband, this is the organization. And I can look over it, in my experience, of being involved with this fraternity. It's the greatest organization that I think that anybody could ever even consider, trying to become associated with and involved.
Tell a new lodge officer, or maybe even a new worshipful master, what advice would you give him?
At least, worshipful master, you're going to be in charge of the activities of your lodge for a year. And it's going to be incumbent before you become worshipful master to put in a tremendous amount of effort of doing some planning and some thinking about some of the things that you want to do as worshipful master of your lodge, and doing some activities and some functions that are actually going to help your lodge become a stronger, more vibrant organization. And so it actually comes before your worshipful master of doing a lot of planning and preparation and putting together some plans to try to help make your lodge, a successful group.
Master came to you and said he was thinking about running for Grand Lodge. What advice would you give him? What would you tell him?
The first thing that I would say is you're going to need to really give some serious consideration about the tremendous amount of time and financial commitment that you're going to be subjecting yourself to. And I think, obviously, if the guy is married, I would strongly encourage them to get the support of their lady, because, coming through the Grand Lodge line, you need a lot of that support. There's a lot of different things at different times that go on that involve and include the ladies. And it's also going to include a lot of your time without your wife being involved, but you're going to have a person that's going to be willing to be understanding and to be willing to support you and help you along as you're kind of going through. So both the support of your wife and your family, and to realize that the time and the financial commitment that you're going to be subjecting yourself to, that you really need to really give that some serious thought before you accept and decide that you want to throw your hat in the ring and offer yourself as a candidate for Grand Lodge.
You've touched on this a little bit already, but tell us how Masonry's impacted your life.
Masonry has been a part of my life since 1958 when I joined DMLA. And I can't remember a year that's gone by that I have not been actively involved in whether it's been in my lodge or whether it's been in Scottish Rite or with Grand Lodge. And it's really become the backbone of my life. I don't have a significant number of what I would call friends outside of the Masonic fraternity. The biggest share of friends and acquaintances that I have met, since I began associated, involved with the Masonic fraternity. And I've made a great number of friends, and we do a lot of things together. And there's some smaller groups of those friends that kind of get together on a regular basis and go out and maybe go on a trip someplace or just get together to have a nice dinner. So it's the friends that I've met, the experiences that I've had, and I feel that it's helped make me you know, a better member of society as a result of belonging to the fraternity.
Any final reflections on the fraternity?
I guess, I think I've really said it all. Masonry, you know, has been a major portion of my life, and I have absolutely no regrets, you know, of anything that I look back on, of the activities, the involvement, and the associations I've met with the organization. I have absolutely no regrets. I'm just looking forward to many more years of being able to be associated with what I call the greatest philanthropy and the greatest fraternity in the world.
Bob, it's been great interviewing you today. Thank you for participating in our program, and thank you for everything you've done for our fraternity.
Thank you.